Welcome to another edition of Optica with Dr. Gabriel Salguero, where we invite you to open your eyes and see what God is doing. And you want to take out your coffee, your electronic device, your paper and pen, because we have a great episode today. And we have a great thought leader, pastor, and mentor and author with us. And I'm talking about none other than Dr. A.R. Bernard. Welcome to Optica, Dr. Bernard.
Blessings. Good to be with you.
It's great to have somebody from New York in sunny Florida. And I want you to know this, Dr. Bernard. First time we are before a live studio audience. So
Really?
put your hands together, live studio
You
audience.
need to clap. That's good. Yeah.
So you are inaugural guest for Live Optica. And thank you. For those of you who are watching the Optica podcast or listening on one of the platforms, we've had a wonderful day of leadership training with pastors and leaders across the country and both locally in Central Florida. And I want to thank you for that on behalf of Optica and on behalf of our church. So let's get right away. If you don't know Dr. A.R. Bernard, I'm going to put on the screen all of his platforms and links. He is the lead pastor and founder of Christian Cultural Center, a influential and emblematic church in New York City with multiple campuses, a New York Times best-selling author, and also a mentor to pastors and leaders and been pastoring for over 4 decades. Happily married to Karen, 7 sons, multiple grandchildren, and now I heard a great-grandchild.
A great-grandchild.
And you look amazing.
I'm trying to hang tough. Doing my best.
So today's episode, we want to talk about leadership. We want to talk about leadership in a culture of crisis and the challenges of leadership in the 21st century, which is also a culture of opportunity, as you've taught us this morning. And so what I want to begin with is, tell me a little bit about how you've navigated sustainability. The pastors who are listening, the leaders, we have entrepreneurs who subscribe. How have you been able to sustain for over 4 decades?
Wow. When you think of sustainability, right, you're thinking of systems and structures that allow you to manage continuity and change. We spoke about that earlier. The key to longevity, which is sustainability, is managing continuity and change. Being able to adapt and adjust to an ever-changing world, not just externally, but internally. Because organizations, congregations, ministries, even families go through growth, development, and change in terms of the structures and the dynamics that are at play in each of them. So managing continuity and change. So smooth, uninterrupted continuity and change, which is the inevitable. Change is the only constant in life. Change is the essence of maturation. When change doesn't take place from the top voluntarily, it will take place from the bottom by revolution. And I don't necessarily mean violent revolution. I mean the need and demand for change that is not realized by those in positions of power and influence. We've seen a lot of grassroots movements take place within a society and even in a corporation and in a ministry, where the need for change has not been appreciated or understood. And change is not an event, it's a process. Events can become the catalyst for change, but change is a process over time. And you have to be careful. And depending upon how large the organization or the ministry, that determines the sensitivity and the need to be conscious of how fast you're trying to make change take place. It takes one moment to make a decision to turn an ocean liner around. It's a huge vessel, but it takes 5 miles to actually turn it around. And if you do that too fast, you can capsize the ocean liner. So you have to understand the size of the vehicle that you're trying to change, the organization, whatever, and time it in such a way that you don't create unnecessary crisis as you implement and affect those changes.
That's it. let's put a little magnifying glass on this continuity and change. How do you discern what to change and what to keep? Because continuity is steadfastness. We keep this. This shouldn't change. This is eternal, or this is for the long haul. How do you as a leader determine, okay, change this, what to change and what to keep, and how do you share that with your leaders?
Wow, and that's a good point, because the key to longevity is managing continuity and change. The secret to managing continuity and change is knowing what to change and what to continue. If you change what you should continue, you'll lose your identity. If you continue what you should change, you can become irrelevant. So change has to be made, but there are certain elements of your DNA, the DNA of an organization, a ministry, even a family, and an individual, that should remain consistent. Systems and structures, methods, they change. But the key brand identity must remain constant. We changed the name of our ministry 3 times in the 46 years.
I didn't know that.
We began as Household of Faith. And at that time, we were like a little household of faith.
It reflected where you were.
Exactly. And then we changed the name to Christian Life Center. And I spent 10 years during that period moving towards where we are today as Christian Cultural Center, because I was growing and evolving, and the ministry growing and evolving with me. We maintain a very specific identity in that we are a teaching ministry. Our objective is to get people to see life from God's perspective as revealed in Scripture and in the natural order. So that has remained consistent regardless of the name changes, regardless of staff changes, regardless of changes in systems, structures, and methods. That has been the heart of our ministry. We're a teaching ministry.
Well, that's insightful. You heard it here on Optica with Dr. A.R. Bernard, a special session. Share it with your friends. You heard that it is a balancing act, if I'm reading you right, between what to adapt, what to transform, what to change, and what to keep. And there's a discernment process that happens internally with you. Okay, mission, that doesn't change, but methods, they can change. Let me talk about some challenges that young pastors, and you know, my wife told me the other day, you're not in the young pastor group anymore. I turned 51.
I'm sorry that you left us.
No. Okay. That's why you're Dr. A.R. Bernard. The reality is that the generation I serve or I come from, and the succeeding generations, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, so forth, they're facing some challenges that maybe we faced, but in a different way, or they're totally different challenges. And one of the things that you spoke to our leaders were about speaking to the social mind. You're working on a book, forthcoming book that I'm going to pre-order about how you speak to, preach to, communicate to the social mind. And you talked about different soils. One of them you talked about was kind of the superficial soil of populism, of pop culture, of cult of celebrity. So let's talk about that challenge in particular. How have you navigated your fame and your influence in a way that doesn't foster a cult of celebrity or idol worship of the person? How do you help young pastors who are growing, who are expanding, navigate influence and being recognized without fostering a culture of narcissism or celebrity?
Well, maybe it was a little bit of ignorance, because I didn't know I was famous until we had lunch today and you told me I was famous.
Come on.
I just didn't know. So maybe that was a good thing. Look, fame, money, power, these are fleeting. They're temporary. They're based on external circumstances. Your true value is who and what you are intrinsically. That doesn't depend on external validation. And that's what our faith brings to us. It begins with the Imago Dei. We are created in the image of God. We are imagers of God. We reflect in many, many ways his communicable attributes. And it's those intrinsic qualities that really express our value and worth. There's an expression that we find in the New Testament, begins with the Gospel of John, where Jesus is at the wedding of Cana, and he turns dirty water in dirty water pots into wine. And when he did the miracle and presented it, those at the wedding feast were shocked because they didn't know the origin, the history. So they thought it was the best thing in the world.
Best wine ever.
And yeah, because they said what is natural, and that is that usually bring the best wine out first, right? And then when people are too drunk to know the difference, you bring out the bad wine, and they take it from there. But beautifully in the text, it says, and this Jesus did and revealed his glory. Wow. What does that mean?
That's good.
How do we understand the text in John's Gospel, chapter 1, verse 14? And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Well, the glory of something is its intrinsic value, its worth. The glory of gold, its worth, its brilliance, no matter what shape or form you may put it in, it still retains that intrinsic value. So the glory of an object, its intrinsic value, its worth, regardless of any external circumstances, and not in need of any external validation. So when it says that he revealed his glory, he was revealing his worth to us. And that is expressed and manifested in his character, God's character, his nature, and his presence. His character of love, compassion, light, all of those things. His nature, his omnipotence, his omnipresence, his eternality, all of those things. So it was expressing what his value is to us in contact with humanity.
That's good.
So when I think about it that way, I understand that my true value, my true worth is who I am and what I am intrinsically. And that's what the world really needs. And that's what God wants to communicate to the rest of the world.
Your character, your essence. Now, why do you think this other message is so captivating and so seductive? Henry Nouwen talked about the great temptations. They're seductive. They bring us in. Why, in many places, not all, there is that temptation to just yield to this cult of celebrity? What do you think about it, that it's attracting so many people?
Shiny, shiny, shiny. It's high gloss. And the reality is, the higher the gloss, the cheaper the merchandise. So in order to cover up the little value that it holds, they have to give it an appearance of value. So we live in a world of appearances, and people can become famous just off of appearances. Also, it takes time, and we want to be in control. Interesting, two chapters of Scripture side by side. Genesis chapter 11, the people say, let us make a name for ourselves. Genesis chapter 12, God approaches Abraham and says, I'll make your name great. So you've got to choose whether you're going to be the one to elevate yourself, which means it's going to be temporary, and you're going to need constructs around you to help you with that elevation and that movement towards fame, which means that they can collapse just like that. But when God does it, he's eternal. He breathes into it his character, his essence, and it maintains that value as he's breathing into it.
That's insightful. You're here on Optica with Dr. Gabriel Salguero, and today we're talking to Dr. A.R. Bernard about longevity, sustainability, and character in ministry, and you have much to say about this. Earlier today, when you were talking to those pastors across the country, you started talking about a deep faith, a reflective faith, a faith that's lived out and thought out. and you told them about your discipline of study, but also not just knowing the gospel, but knowing culture and how you navigate. The name of your church is Christian Cultural Center. It's not called Christian Cultural Church. But it's Christian. You lead with that, with your Christian identity, but you're also engaging culture. And you cautioned the pastors that you were on with and the leaders. You said, hey, you have to know Christianity, but you also have to know culture, and you can't do this superficially. How do we engender and cultivate? How have you, through the men and women you've mentored and the leaders you've developed in your multiple ministries, engendered a thoughtful Christianity that understands, in your words, the social minds, the different aspects? How do you teach that? Or can you teach that? It might be the question.
We've been commanded to do that. Jesus said, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. The word consider is to reflect, to engage in deep thought in order to go through a process of coming to a place of understanding something that's right in front of you. So he's presented the natural order and how it thrives. And he has called us to reflection. You cannot grow without reflection. You have to think about what you say, how you say it. You have to think about information that's coming to you. There's two passages, one that's found in the Gospel of Matthew and one that's found in the Gospel of Mark. And Jesus says, take heed, King James language here. He said, take heed how you hear, because with the same value that you place on it, whatever measure you measure, it will be measured to you again. That phrase simply means that the degree of value or how you value something will determine its influence in your life. But he says specifically, take heed how you hear. And in the other gospel, he says, take heed what you hear. So there are two Greek words there. One is pos, P-O-H-S is how it's pronounced, but it's written P-O-S. And it's like the word dose, pos, right? And it has two meanings in that it's saying you have to consider the source, right?
That's good.
Consider the source, who it's coming from, what it's coming from. The other one is the word tis, like the word peace, right? Consider how you're processing the information intellectually and emotionally. So you've got to pay attention to the source that information is coming from and how you're processing that information intellectually and emotionally. Because intellectual processing and emotional processing shapes and informs your attitude. And attitude determines how you approach. Approach determines success or failure.
That's good.
Anything that you take on.
That's good. And this is, one of the warnings you told us is a populist faith that is not reflective faith. Mark Knoll writes a book, The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind. And he says, the scandal of the evangelical mind is that we don't have one, that we don't use it. He's obviously unpacks that on things that we've done historically. And so you are calling us to both a deeply thought life, but also to be aware of our emotions. It's not either or. You're calling us to this kind of integrated leadership that says, hey, think deeply about these things, especially if you're going to try to teach on them and say, I want to speak on this. You've thought it out. You've read the source. You've prayed over it, but also how the impact emotionally on people and you as a leader. And,
Right.
and that's not easy. Let me move in a different.
And this speaks to critical thinking, if I may. I don't.
No, I think that's right. No,
that's
right. That's right.
Yeah, because we have to teach people how to think critically. So when we unpack a text and speak of the context and the influences of language and words, what they mean and how we expand them, we're teaching them to think critically. Unfortunately, people don't think critically. Critical thinking demands, first of all, that you question. What are the facts? What really took place? Not opinion and commentary. Begin with the facts. Begin with what was actually said, what was actually done, what was actually experienced, right? So begin there. Question. The next step is to analyze. How do all of the parts of this experience, incident, or information fit together? What are all these moving parts and how do they influence each other? Analyze to gain understanding. After you analyze, you reflect. What does it all mean? You know, it's like on the day of Pentecost, they have this experience and they witness these.
What is this?
Yeah, what is this? What meaneth this? King James language. And then after you draw conclusions as to what all of the information means, then lastly, you debate your own conclusions.
Oh, that's good.
Before you even go out to debate someone else, you debate your own conclusions. Internally.
Reflection.
You're reflecting.
Am I jumping to conclusions?
Exactly. Is that wholesome? Is that correct? Does that hold up? And then when you feel good about that debate and those conclusions, now you're ready to engage in conversation externally.
So part of longevity is having a thought out, lived out faith.
Yeah.
Part of longevity is focusing on your character, as you said in our first part of this interview. Let me talk a little bit about burnout. You've been pastoring how long now?
46 years.
God bless you and thank you. 46 years. And you were reflecting with this host of leaders earlier today on Solomon's prayer, how you navigate teams and circles of influence and who has access and at what level of access. And you said something about Solomon praying, Lord, teach me or give me the wisdom of how to
go in
and come out. So you're not burning out. And at the same time, you're navigating leaders you're developing or leaders you have relationship with. Can you unpack how navigating relationships has helped you in longevity?
Yeah, relationships are spatial. People occupy a certain space in your life in proximity to you. You're in the center of that relationship. The closer people are to you, the more transparent, the more vulnerable you are. And you have to manage transparency and vulnerability because transparency means I can show you what my life is about. And there are people that you can be transparent with. Vulnerability means I'm going to allow you to speak into what my life's about. Not everybody has the maturity or capacity to speak into your life and what it's about. Although they're able to experience the transparency and see what your life is about. So you have to know who fits what category in terms of their relationship with you. Also, people have to be mature enough to occupy spaces close to you because the closer they are, the more they see the real you. So they know your failings, your shortcomings, your successes, your failures, your emotions, and they have to be mature enough to handle that. Everyone's not mature enough to handle that. So I manage those spaces. I remember a young man, he said, Pastor, I would love to take you to lunch one day. I said, I appreciate the offer, but that's not something I'm willing to do. He said, well, why not? I said, because if I go to lunch, I want to be able to enjoy the meal. And if I go to lunch with you, I'm going to have to be on guard. I'm going to have to be conscious of everything I say and do. He said, well, why you say that? I said, because of how you are. You will judge every little thing you see about me. Wow. And I don't know what you're going to formulate in your mind and how you're going to, communicate that to others. So that's not lunch, that's work. And I'm just not willing to engage in that.
Yeah. And that it's interesting because you're taking the risk of being misinterpreted because you have criteria for as Jesus did, right? Jesus had a group.
Yeah, we talked about that. He had the multitudes, the 500, the 70, the 12, the 3 that he took up on the Mount of Transfiguration with him, and the relationship that he had with John, that the others respected. So when he announced that someone's going to betray him, they all looked at John.
Like, he was the closest, yeah.
So there was that very close relationship there. So people occupied different spaces. He took Peter, James, and John to the Mount of Transfiguration. He didn't invite the others. So he understood that individuals were at certain levels of maturity and could handle what they would experience in him manifesting himself in his glory.
So your going in is
having a rapport, being where the people are, feeling what they feel so you could have empathy and compassion for them. Because if you're removed and trying to lead them from the ivory tower, you're out of touch with them. So you need to be able to be among them. Interestingly enough, God says to Moses, all right, take your shoes off because you're on holy ground. There's two things going on there. Number one, Moses had to understand that God was separate, transcendent, higher, to be respected. So he had to take off his shoes in honor and respect of that holiness. But also take your shoes off because I'm about to put you in a position of leadership with the people. And you need to have your feet on the ground where they are. You need to feel where they walk and what they experience in life. So it gave
That's
him.
good, Bishop. That's good.
He had to keep him in touch. So Solomon is saying, let me go in, be amongst the people, feel what they feel, experience what they experience. But in order to lead them, I have to be able to love them objectively, which means I have to be able to step away from them so I could speak truthfully to them and not be afraid of how they're going to react.
And that going out, that objective distance, if you will,
Yeah.
after you've been proximate, that can easily be misjudged.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So there is that movement in and out that Solomon was talking about, and you have to learn how to navigate that. You have to be able to know when to withdraw. And Jesus did this. There were times when he withdrew himself from his disciples so he could pray, so he could spend time alone with the Father, so that he could, recharge himself apart from these individuals who were constantly pulling from him.
And that helps, I think, with the challenges of burnout and exhaustion, right? And the not being close can leave you to pride and arrogance. And so it's that tension of when, where, who, that requires that word discernment and filter.